Jenny Miller was tired of her boring life. Every morning, she looked at all her store cards on her small kitchen table, the ones that gave you free stuff after buying things many times. She had cards from everywhere. Bob's Burger Place, 2 more stamps for a free burger. Sweet Treats ice cream, halfway to getting free sprinkles. And Lucky's Laundry, just 3 more washes until a free one. Her life was like these cards. Nothing exciting ever happened. That changed the day she found the lucky bean. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when everything changed. Usually, Jenny would get her morning coffee from Starbucks on Main Street, always the same vanilla coffee with extra milk. But that morning, the rain was so heavy that she had to run into the nearest open door. That's how she found herself in a coffee shop she had never seen before, even though she walked down this street every single day to work. The Lucky Bean wasn't like other coffee shops. It looked like something from an old movie. The walls were painted in warm red and gold colors. Old, comfortable chairs that didn't match were placed around wooden tables that looked hundreds of years old. Small lights hung from the ceiling on copper chains, making everything glow softly. The smell wasn't just coffee. It was something else too, like cookies baking and flowers blooming at the same time. Behind the counter stood a man with friendly eyes and a gray beard. He wore a dark blue apron covered in tiny stars that seemed to twinkle when he moved. "I'm Pop," he said with a warm smile. "That's what everyone calls me." When Jenny ordered her usual coffee, Pop smiled like he knew a good secret, but wasn't ready to share it yet. "First time here?" he asked, even though Jenny could tell he already knew. When she nodded, he pulled out what she thought was going to be another boring coffee shop card. But this one was strange. Instead of empty circles waiting to be filled, it had numbers going backward. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The numbers were written in shiny gold ink that seemed to move in the light. "I don't get it," Jenny said, looking at the card closely. "Why does it count down instead of up?" Pop took out a special stamp shaped like a tiny key made of brass. "Sometimes," he said, pressing the stamp onto the number 10, "the best things in life happen when we lose something instead of getting something." Jenny was about to ask what he meant when something weird happened. A woman rushed into the shop, completely dry despite the rain outside. Her name was Rose. Jenny knew this because Pop called out to her. Rose was holding the same kind of card Jenny had just gotten, but hers only had one number left, the 0. Rose's hands were shaking as she gave Pop her card. "Is this really it?" she asked. Her voice was shaking too, but she was smiling. "Only if you're sure you're ready," Pop said quietly. Rose nodded, and Jenny noticed something strange. Rose's eyes were changing color, shifting from brown to a soft gold. Pop pressed his stamp over the 0 on Rose's card. For a moment, the whole shop got brighter, like someone had turned on 1,000 tiny lights. Jenny blinked, and when she opened her eyes, Rose was gone. Not just gone from the counter, gone completely. Her card lay on the counter, all the numbers now glowing like little stars. Jenny looked around the shop. Nobody else seemed surprised that a woman had just disappeared. Other customers were sipping their coffee and reading books like nothing had happened. Even stranger, when Jenny looked at her watch, no time had passed at all since she'd first walked in. On her way out, Jenny saw something that made her stop. Through the window, she spotted Rose crossing the street, but she looked different. She was wearing clothes Jenny had never seen before, and she seemed to be walking on air, her feet barely touching the wet sidewalk. Before Jenny could run out to talk to her, Rose turned a corner and vanished. Jenny reached into her bag and touched her new card. The number 10 felt warm under her fingers, like it was alive. She had a feeling this wasn't going to be like her other loyalty cards. Not at all. For the next few days, Jenny couldn't stop thinking about the lucky bean. She kept pulling out her strange countdown card during work at her office job, where she typed numbers into computers all day. The golden number 10 with Pop's stamp over it seemed to wink at her under the boring office lights. Her coworker Mike asked if she was okay when he caught her staring at it for the 5th time that day. A week passed before Jenny found the courage to go back. She tried to find the shop on her phone map, but it wasn't there. She even walked up and down the street 3 times after work, but somehow she couldn't spot it. It was like the shop only appeared when it wanted to be found. Then one rainy morning, just like the first time, there it was. The wooden sign with the golden bean swung gently in the wind, even though Jenny could have sworn there wasn't any breeze. This time, the bell above the door made a sound like tiny laughing children when she walked in. The shop looked different, but somehow the same. The chairs had changed colors. She was sure the big armchair by the window had been red last time, but now it was a deep purple. And was that plant in the corner always that tall? It seemed to bend down slightly like it was trying to look at her. "Back for your second stamp?" Pop asked before she could even reach the counter. He was wearing the same starry apron, but today the stars were moving across the fabric, making little patterns like constellations. "How did you know I was coming?" Jenny asked. Pop smiled and pulled out his brass key stamp. "The cards always know when their owners are ready," he said, like this explained everything. Just like they knew Rose was ready last week. Jenny's heart jumped. "Rose, the woman who disappeared. What happened to her? I saw her outside, but she looked different." A young man sitting nearby looked up from his coffee. He had a card too, Jenny noticed, with only the number 3 left unstamped. "You saw someone after their 0? He asked, his eyes wide. "What was it like?" Before Jenny could answer, Pop cleared his throat. "Everyone's 0 is different," he said gently but firmly. "Just like everyone's reason for counting down is different." He looked at Jenny. "Speaking of counting down, are you ready for your second stamp?" Jenny pulled out her card with shaking hands. As soon as Pop's stamp touched the number 9, the whole shop filled with the smell of chocolate chip cookies, her grandmother's special recipe. Jenny hadn't smelled that since her grandmother passed away 10 years ago. Her eyes filled with tears. "How did you—" she started to ask, but stopped when she saw what was happening to her card. The stamped numbers, 10 and now 9, were moving on the paper, dancing around each other like they were playing. "Each stamp brings you closer," Pop said softly. "Not to losing something, but to finding something you didn't know you were looking for." Just then, the door opened and a little girl walked in. She looked about 8 years old and was wearing bright yellow rain boots. Even though it wasn't raining anymore, the strange thing was, she seemed to be floating a few inches above the ground. She was holding a countdown card with only 1 left unstamped. "Hi, Emma," Pop said warmly. "Is it time?" The little girl nodded seriously. "I saw what I needed to see at number 2, she said in a voice that sounded much older than she looked. "I'm ready for 0 now." Jenny watched as Pop took Emma's card. Just before he stamped it, Emma turned to Jenny and said, "Don't be scared when you get to 5. That's when things start getting really interesting." Then Pop's stamp touched the 0, and Emma simply faded away, leaving behind only the sound of bells and the smell of summer rain. Jenny clutched her card tighter, watching as the numbers 9 and 10 continued their dance. What would happen when she reached 5? And more importantly, what would she find at 0? The next morning, Jenny woke up to find her alarm clock running backwards. The numbers were counting down instead of up, just like her coffee shop card. She blinked hard and looked again. Everything was normal. But when she picked up her phone, she noticed all her apps had rearranged themselves in reverse alphabetical order. Strange things kept happening all week. Her computer at work started playing old songs her mother used to sing to her. The numbers she typed into spreadsheets turned into little birds, before settling down into their correct places. Nobody else seemed to notice anything weird, though Mike did ask why she was smiling at her computer screen so much. It took 3 days before the lucky bean appeared again. This time, it was on a totally different street, squeezed between a bookstore and a candy shop that Jenny had never seen before. The shop's walls were now a deep green color, and she could have sworn they were breathing slowly, like the whole place was alive. Inside, she found Pop teaching a cat how to make coffee. The cat, wearing a tiny apron with moons on it, was carefully pushing coffee beans around with its paw. "Ah, Jenny," Pop called out. "Meet Professor Whiskers. He's on number 4 of his card." The cat looked at Jenny with eyes that seemed too wise for a regular cat. It nodded at her, actually nodded, before going back to its coffee beans. "Ready for number 8? Pop asked, already holding his stamp. But before he could stamp Jenny's card, a loud crash came from outside. Through the window, Jenny saw a man running past, his card clutched in his hand. Pop's face turned serious. "Tried to stamp his own card," he explained sadly. "Some people think they can rush the countdown. Never works." As he stamped Jenny's number 8, something amazing happened. All the coffee cups in the shop started floating, spinning slowly in the air like a coffee cup ballet. Professor Whiskers didn't seem surprised at all, just batted lazily at a passing cup. "Is this normal?" Jenny asked, watching as her own coffee cup danced above her head. An old woman sitting nearby laughed. She had a card showing number 2. "Normal stopped being normal the moment you walked into the lucky bean, dear," she said. "Just wait until you hit 7. That's when the real fun begins. Just then, Jenny noticed something odd about the old woman. She could see right through her, like she was made of fog. "Oh, don't mind this," the woman said, waving her somewhat transparent hand. "Side effect of number 2. I'm starting to fade a bit early. Some people do, you know." Pop nodded wisely. Everyone's countdown is different because everyone's path is different. Some people fade slowly, some change all at once, some float, some spark, some sing. It all depends on what you need to find. "Find what?" Jenny asked, but at that moment all the floating cups suddenly dropped, landing perfectly on their saucers without spilling a drop. Professor Whiskers meowed something that sounded suspiciously like "show off" at Pop. As Jenny got up to leave, she saw her reflection in the shop's window. For a second, she thought she saw someone else standing behind her, a little girl who looked exactly like she had at age 8. The girl winked at her and disappeared. On her way home, Jenny's card felt warm in her pocket. When she took it out, numbers 10, 9, and 8 were playing tag with each other across the card, leaving tiny trails of golden light behind them. She wondered what would happen at number 7, and why everyone she met seemed to hint at something big coming at number 5. Getting to number 7 was harder than Jenny expected. The lucky bean kept moving. One day it was next to her office, painted bright yellow. The next time she found it, it was near the park, looking like a cozy log cabin. Once she even spotted it in her apartment building's lobby, squished between the mailboxes and the elevator, but by the time she ran downstairs, it had vanished. Finally, on a Tuesday that felt like a Sunday, her calendar kept changing its mind lately, she found the shop inside an old movie theater. Today it looked like a circus tent, complete with striped walls and a tiny popcorn machine that was popping backwards, the popcorn jumping from the floor back into kernels. "You've been avoiding us," Pop said, not looking up from where he was teaching Professor Whiskers how to juggle coffee beans. The cat had gotten quite good at it. "No, I just couldn't find you," Jenny protested. "The shop is always where you need it to be," the transparent old woman said. She was even more see-through now, sitting in her usual corner. "You just weren't ready to need us yet." Before Jenny could argue, the door chimed. A man walked in backwards, ordered his coffee backwards, and left backwards. Nobody else seemed to find this strange. "Ready for 7?" Pop asked, holding up his stamp. Jenny nodded, pulling out her card. As soon as Pop's stamp touched the number 7, something extraordinary happened. All the chalkboards showing coffee prices started writing themselves. But instead of drink names, they were writing moments from Jenny's life. Age 6, lost first tooth. Age 12, won spelling bee. Age 15, first heartbreak. Age 23, got boring job. Age 28, found the lucky bean. Then something new appeared. Age, found what was lost. "What does that mean?" Jenny asked. But when she turned around, the shop was empty except for Professor Whiskers, who was now somehow solving a crossword puzzle. "Everyone's gone to the between," the cat said casually, not looking up from his puzzle. Jenny was too surprised by the talking cat to be surprised that the cat was talking. "The between?" "The place between numbers," Professor Whiskers explained, filling in 9 down, metamorphosis, with his paw, where people go when they're counting down. Pop's there now, helping someone through their 3. Tricky number 3. Almost as tricky as 5 will be for you. Jenny sat down hard in a nearby chair, which helpfully slid over to catch her. "You can talk," she said finally. "Of course I can talk. I'm on number 4. Talking is nothing. You should see what I can do with string theory." The cat finally looked up. "But that's not what you should be worried about. Look at your hands." Jenny looked down. Her hands were starting to glow softly, like she had swallowed starlight, and through her skin, she could see tiny numbers floating in her veins, all counting down from 7. "Side effect of 7, Professor Whiskers said, going back to his puzzle. "You're starting to see the between. Just wait until 6. That's when you start to hear it too." Just then, Pop reappeared, looking like he'd been running through rain made of rainbow drops. "Sorry about that," he said. "Someone needed help with their 3. They kept turning into butterflies and getting stuck." He looked at Jenny's glowing hands. 7 is settling in nicely. You might want to wear gloves at work tomorrow. Sometimes the glow gets bright enough to read by." As Jenny left the shop, which had somehow turned into a treehouse while she wasn't looking, she heard Professor Whiskers say to Pop, "Should we tell her about the dragons at 6? "Let's let her find out on her own," Pop replied. "Everyone does eventually." Jenny looked at her card. Numbers 10 through 7 were now playing a tiny game of hide and seek, ducking behind each other and giggling silently. She wondered what the cat meant about dragons, and why her hands were starting to whisper counting songs to her on her way home. The dragons showed up before Jenny even got her number 6 stamp. They weren't big dragons, more like flying lizards the size of cats. They followed her to work, invisible to everyone else, making her paperwork float and turning her coffee into liquid gold, which still tasted like coffee, thankfully. Mike from the office started acting weird around her. "Your eyes," he said one day. "They keep changing color, and sometimes I swear I can hear music when you walk past." Jenny just smiled. She couldn't tell him that the music was coming from the tiny dragons, who liked to hum pop songs from the 80s. Finding the lucky bean was easier now. Jenny just had to follow the dragons, who seemed to know where the shop would appear next. Today it was tucked inside a giant snow globe, even though it was summer, complete with falling snow that tasted like birthday cake. Professor Whiskers was teaching a group of other cats how to do advanced calculus when Jenny walked in. He was now slightly transparent too, having reached number 3 on his card. "The student becomes the teacher," he said wisely, before going back to explaining quantum physics to a kitten. "Ready for 6? Pop asked. He was wearing an apron that seemed to be made of moving clouds today. "It's a big one. 6 is when most people start to remember." "Remember what?" Jenny asked. "What they lost," the transparent old woman answered. She was barely visible now, just an outline in a comfy chair. "Or maybe what lost them. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." When Pop's stamp touched number 6 on Jenny's card, the whole world seemed to flip upside down. The shop turned inside out, and suddenly Jenny was standing in her childhood bedroom. But it wasn't a memory. She was actually there, watching her 8-year-old self playing with a music box she'd forgotten about until now. "This was the day," little Jenny said, looking right at grown-up Jenny. "The day everything changed." Before Jenny could ask what she meant, she was back in the shop. But things were different. The dragons were larger now, and they were writing messages in the air with their fire. The messages were in a language Jenny didn't know, but somehow she could understand them. "Remember," they wrote. "Remember what you forgot to remember." Pop handed her a coffee that wasn't coffee at all. It was liquid memories, swirling with colors. "Drink this," he said. "It will help with what's coming at 5. "What's coming at 5? Jenny asked, but Pop just smiled. Professor Whiskers jumped onto her table, his transparent form rippling like water. 5 is when you see the doors, he said mysteriously. All the doors you never opened, all the doors you wish you had, and the one door you need to find. As Jenny left the shop, which was now a floating island hovering above the city, she noticed she could see through her feet slightly. The dragons followed her home, singing Beatles songs in backwards dragon language. Her card was warm in her pocket, numbers 10 through 6 now putting on a tiny fireworks show on its surface. That night, Jenny dreamed of doors, thousands of them, all slightly open, all waiting. Behind each one, she could hear music boxes playing. The morning of number 5, Jenny woke up floating 3 feet above her bed. The dragons were asleep in midair around her, snoring tiny musical notes that turned into butterflies. Her mirror showed 7 different versions of her, each one at a different age, all waving at each other. At work, things got weird. Well, weirder. Her computer started showing her alternate lives. Jenny the astronaut, Jenny the circus performer, Jenny the dragon trainer. Mike couldn't see it, but he did notice when her desk started floating too. "Jenny," he said carefully, "are you aware that you're glowing and sort of transparent and humming a song that sounds like whale music?" The lucky bean found her this time. The shop literally walked up to her on giant coffee bean legs and settled down right in front of her office building. Today it looked like a giant teacup made of stars. Inside, Professor Whiskers was saying goodbye. He had reached 0 on his card. "We'll meet again," he told Jenny, his form now just a sparkle of light with whiskers. "In another countdown, perhaps." Then he faded away, leaving behind a small book titled Quantum Physics for Feline Friends. 5 is special, Pop said, his apron today made of moving movie scenes. 5 is when you find the door. "What door?" Jenny asked. The transparent old woman, now just a friendly voice in the corner, laughed. "Your door, dear. The one you've been looking for since you were 8. Since the day the music stopped." Jenny's heart skipped. "The music box," she whispered. When Pop's stamp touched number 5, every wall in the shop became a door. Hundreds of doors, thousands of them, each one showing a different moment in Jenny's life. But one door was different. It was small, made of blue wood, with tiny golden music notes painted on it. Just like the music box door, Jenny breathed. The one that disappeared when Mom died. The one that played her special song. Pop nodded. Some doors close too early. Some music stops too soon. That's why we count down. To find our way back to the doors we lost. Jenny reached for the blue door's handle, but it vanished. All the doors did. But now she could hear it. Her mom's special song playing faintly, like it was coming from far away. Not yet, Pop said gently. The door will come back at 0. But first, you need to understand why it closed. As Jenny left the shop, now shaped like a giant music box, she noticed she was almost as transparent as the old woman had been. The dragons were singing her mom's song now, their fire writing showing pictures from her childhood. Her card felt ice cold and burning hot at the same time. Numbers 10 through 5 were acting out her memories like a tiny play, showing the day the music box disappeared, the day after the funeral, when 8-year-old Jenny had locked away her memories of the music, of the joy, of everything. That night, Jenny dreamed of her mom sitting in the Lucky Bean, drinking liquid starlight with Pop and Professor Whiskers, all of them waiting for something, or someone. Number 4 came on a day when the world seemed to be made of music. Jenny could barely see the real world anymore. Everything had turned into musical notes. Cars drove by playing symphonies. People walked in rhythm to songs only she could hear. The dragons had formed a small orchestra, playing her mom's song on tiny instruments made of light. The Lucky Bean appeared in her apartment this time, right in her living room. It had turned her whole apartment into a giant music box, complete with a slowly spinning ballerina on her coffee table. Pop was there making coffee out of melted memories and lost lullabies. Professor Whiskers says hello from the between, Pop said, his apron now showing moving scenes from Jenny's childhood. He's having tea with your mom right now. She's very proud of how far you've come. Jenny's heart jumped. You've seen my mom? She's in the between? Everyone we've lost is in the between, said the old woman's voice, now just a shimmer in the air, waiting behind their own doors. Some doors are just harder to find than others. When Pop stamped number 4, something extraordinary happened. Jenny split into 4 versions of herself. 8-year-old Jenny, teenage Jenny, present Jenny, and a Jenny she hadn't become yet. They all stood in a circle, holding hands. Remember the song, little Jenny said. Remember the door, teenage Jenny added. Remember the joy, said future Jenny. Present Jenny just cried, her tears turning into tiny musical notes that floated away. The dragons caught her tears in little cups, turning them into drinks that tasted like happy memories. Jenny could now see the between through her tears, a place where lost things waited to be found, where closed doors waited to be reopened, where ended songs waited to be sung again. She saw her mom there, sitting with Professor Whiskers, who now had wings made of equations, both of them working on a puzzle that looked like Jenny's life. They waved to her, but she couldn't reach them yet, not until 0. 4 is for finding yourself, Pop explained, serving coffee that played tiny symphony when you drank it. All yourselves, past, present, future, and the self you lost when the music stopped. As the different Jennies faded back into one, she noticed she was almost completely transparent now. The real world looked like a faint drawing, while the between looked more and more real. She could hear thousands of songs there, all the music that had ever been lost or forgotten. Her card was singing now, numbers 10 through 4 dancing a ballet that told her story. The dragons had learned to harmonize, their fire writing showing the sheet music to her mom's special song. That night, Jenny didn't dream. Instead, she floated in the between while she slept, watching her mom and Professor Whiskers solve the puzzle of her life, piece by piece, song by song. Getting to number 3 felt like waking up inside a song. Jenny could barely walk on the ground anymore. She floated everywhere, leaving trails of musical notes behind her. Mike at work finally noticed something was really wrong when Jenny's desk started playing Mozart, and she kept disappearing into thin air during meetings. Maybe you should take some time off, he suggested, trying not to stare at the dragons that he couldn't quite see but could somehow sense. Jenny just smiled, knowing that soon none of this would matter. The Lucky Bean found her in her dreams this time. She woke up to find her bedroom had turned into the shop, with Pop making breakfast out of morning light and forgotten dreams. The walls were made of sheet music today, all of them playing different parts of her mom's song. 3 is tricky, Pop said, his apron showing moving pictures of doors opening and closing. It's when most people try to turn back. The between starts feeling more real than reality. He was right. Jenny could see the between clearly now, a vast space full of lost things and waiting doors. She saw her mom more clearly too, still working on that puzzle with Professor Whiskers. They had finished the edges now, and Jenny could see it was making a picture of a blue door with golden music notes. When Pop's stamp touched number 3, time stopped. Not just in the shop, but everywhere. The whole world froze except for Jenny and the dragons, who were now wearing tiny tuxedos and performing an opera about her life. In the frozen time, Jenny could walk through memories like they were rooms in a house. She saw herself at 8 years old, the day after the funeral, taking the music box to the attic. She watched as little Jenny locked it in a trunk, locked away the music, locked away the joy. "I didn't want to hear music anymore," present Jenny whispered. "Not after Mom's song stopped." "But the music never really stopped," said a voice. Jenny turned to find Professor Whiskers, solid again for a moment, sitting on a frozen clock. "It just went to the between, waiting for you to be ready to hear it again." Through the frozen world, Jenny could hear it, her mom's song getting louder and clearer. The blue door appeared and disappeared in different places, behind a cloud, in a raindrop, in the reflection of a window, always just out of reach, but getting closer. 3 is for understanding, Pop said when time started again. 2 will be for accepting, 1 will be for letting go, and 0, he smiled. 0 is for opening the door. As Jenny left the shop, which had become a giant piano that played memories instead of notes, she noticed she was almost completely part of the between now. The real world looked like a fading photograph, while the between felt solid and real, full of color and music and lost things waiting to be found. Her card was glowing like a star, numbers 10 through 3 performing an entire musical about a little girl who lost a song and the woman who would find it again. That night in the between, Jenny sat with her mom and Professor Whiskers, working on the puzzle together. They were almost finished. The blue door in the picture was starting to glow. Number 2 arrived on a day when Jenny could no longer tell where reality ended, and the between began. She moved through both worlds at once. In one, she was still going to work, still living her normal life. In the between, she floated through an endless space of lost things and waiting doors, each one holding someone's forgotten joy. Mike couldn't really see her at work anymore. She was too transparent, too much a part of the between. "Jenny," he said one day, looking through her rather than at her, "where are you going?" "To find my door," she answered, but her voice played as music in the air rather than words. The lucky bean didn't need to find her anymore. It was everywhere and nowhere, just like she was. Today it existed in a space between heartbeats, built from memories and starlight. Pop was there, his apron showing scenes from Jenny's future now, ones she hadn't lived yet. The dragons had grown huge, wrapping around the shop like loving pets. They sang her mom's song constantly now, their voices mixing with all the lost songs in the between. 2 is for facing truth, Pop said softly. When his stamp touched number 2, Jenny felt something break inside her, a wall she had built 20 years ago. Suddenly, she understood. She hadn't just locked away the music box after her mom died. She'd locked away her ability to feel joy, afraid that losing happiness would hurt too much if she ever lost someone again. In the between, she saw her mom and Professor Whiskers finish the puzzle. The picture showed not just the blue door, but what was behind it, an endless room full of music boxes, each one playing a different moment of joy Jenny had refused to let herself feel over the years. "I've been so afraid," Jenny whispered, her words turning into butterflies made of light, not of losing the music, but of hearing it again. "That's why we count down," said the old woman's voice, now a melody in the air. "Not to lose something, but to lose our fear of having something to lose." Pop served her a cup of liquid courage. It tasted like sunrise and first steps, and learning to dance. "One more number before the door," he said. "Are you ready to let go?" As Jenny left the shop, which was now a garden where memories grew like flowers, she was barely visible in the real world at all. The dragons curled around her like a protective blanket, their scales made of tiny doors all slowly opening. Her card felt alive in her hands, numbers 10 through 2 performing an elaborate light show that told the story of a girl learning to be brave enough to feel joy again. That night, in the between, Jenny could hear all the music boxes playing at once, every happy moment she'd refused to let herself have, every joy she'd locked away, and under all of them, getting louder and clearer, her mom's special song. The day of number 1, Jenny couldn't find the real world at all. She existed purely in the between now, where lost things waited and forgotten songs played. The dragons had turned into pure light, dancing around her like loving stars. Her body was made of music notes, each one playing a different memory. The Lucky Bean wasn't a shop anymore. It had become a door itself, the same blue door from her childhood music box. Pop stood before it, his apron showing the end of Jenny's story, though she couldn't quite see it yet. 1 is for choosing, he said. The last step before 0. The moment when you decide if you're ready to open your door. When his stamp touched number 1, 20 years of locked-away music burst out of Jenny's heart. She saw every moment she'd refused to be happy, every joy she'd turned away from, every song she'd stopped herself from singing. They swirled around her like a tornado of lost chances. In the between, her mom and Professor Whiskers stood waiting by the completed puzzle. The picture showed Jenny opening the blue door, but what lay behind it was still blurry, undefined. The door was never locked, her mom said softly, her voice a melody of love and understanding. You just thought it was. All the dragons burst into song at once, their light bodies forming a bridge between Jenny and the door. The old woman's voice, now pure music, danced around them. 0 is coming, dear. 0 is for finding. Jenny looked at her card one last time. Numbers 10 through 1 had come alive, each one showing a piece of her journey. The fear she'd carried, the joy she'd hidden, the music she'd silenced, and the courage she'd found to hear it all again. Tomorrow, Pop said, you'll find your 0. But first, you need to answer one question. Are you ready to live in a world where you might lose things again? Jenny thought of her mom, of the music box, of all the happiness she'd locked away. Then she looked at the dragons, at Pop, at Professor Whiskers, at all the magical things she'd found by letting go of her fear. Finally, she looked at the blue door, hearing her mom's song playing clearly behind it. The music never really stops, she said, her words turning into golden keys that floated in the air. It just waits for us to be brave enough to hear it again. That night, Jenny floated in the between, watching her whole life play like a symphony. Tomorrow would bring 0, and with it, a choice, to open the door or to walk away. But for the first time in 20 years, she wasn't afraid of what she might find, or what she might lose. The dragons sang her to sleep with her mom's song, and in her dreams, she danced with joy she'd finally allowed herself to remember.